Hello friends, welcome to episode 131 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
10 minutes. That was good. I got some tea. I'm solid.
It's more like 15, but we had a good discussion.
Yeah, we're the ones with the microphones. They're not.
So, if you are just getting caught up on this one, we are pre-recording this episode. So if you're listening to this on the first Wednesday of November, when it
welcome
is
to November.
Originally airing. First off, welcome to November. But this is a pre-recorded show, so there will be no live chat tonight or anything like that. We are recording this immediately after the previous episode you may have just listened to. So if you are still listening to us live, thank you for sticking around.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So, and we are continuing our saga on villains.
On villains, yes.
And moving from how to create them to how to, move them.
Yeah, now that you've got them, what do you do with them? What do they do in your story, and what plots and awfulness are they up to?
And I feel like this one's gonna, I'm not gonna say go longer, but definitely is gonna have a lot more depth to it than our previous one, whereas before we were kind of framing things up and getting you what those characters are, and now we've got to integrate into story, and that takes a lot more effort, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Than some people can do it very easily, but we're going to try and explain it as best we know how and what some things we've done.
Sure.
So what do villains even do?
Well, they do evil stuff.
Well, that's great. It sounds pretty simple.
But I think the most important thing is that villains have goals.
Yes.
Okay, villains, just like the PCs, have something they want to accomplish. They have a quest of their own that they're on. Now, mind you, that may be blow up the world.
Yeah.
That may they may want to drastically alter the status quo, overthrow leadership and install themselves,
change how society works.
Exactly.
Alter reality.
Typically by controlling it. Drastically alter how reality works.
Yep.
Typically by controlling it. That's a lot of I want to become a god. Sort of plot lines of
hurting people who should be hurt.
Yep, they want to hurt people who they believe should be hurt.
Or steal things that they believe was taken from them or should be taken.
Yeah, for whatever justifiable reason that they see should be stolen.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if is Indiana Jones a villain?
Yeah. We can talk about that.
They want to destroy something particular. Be it a gateway, an image, a symbol, an idea in some cases.
And presumably this is something which, by and large, should not be destroyed for whatever reason.
And in the end will drastically change things.
Mm-hmm.
And the heroes need to stop that.
Yeah.
It is the typical, most easy way of doing it. It's not always the case. Sometimes they're involved. So I, kind of looking through a bunch of different things, came up with 3 different areas, and I think Sarah helped me define the last one a little bit better and definitely changed up some of the tones of these.
Sure.
I kind of scaled things into 3 sections. The first one being that you have active villains. These are the ones that are kind of the most common.
Yeah, sure.
That when you think of them, they are often the plot. It's an external rivalry, meaning they're not even usually aware that the heroes are involved.
Sure.
There might be a concept that someone is coming to stop them. They're expecting that. They're just not expecting these individuals.
Right. I'm a bad guy. I'm trying to accomplish my bad thing, and some dude in a mask showed up and said, "Hey, stop right there, villain."
Right.
Now this guy is my enemy, and the plot happens.
Right. And that connection with that rivalry can change greatly. They tend to have an agenda that the characters are usually start off as flies, road bumps, and eventually become outright walls that are trying to stop them or other things.
You've been a thorn in my side for far too long now.
Right. And that kind of, those types of villains, those active villains, are the ones that tend to have the most sway with where the story and the character's involvement with them and integration with them can change. You can have villains who become enamored with the heroes. You can have villains who very hard drive into rivalry because they're thwarting them at every turn, and their interactions are always negative. You can have villains who treat them with utter respect. Like, I understand that you're doing your job, I'm doing my job. It doesn't mean that we can't have a civilized dinner every once in a while and discuss these things.
Sure.
Yes. Of course, tomorrow you're going to bring your army up to my front door, and you're going to sneak in through the canals or something. Some place that one of my henchmen has wildly left open.
Used to this song and dance.
And you're going to try and reach me by the time I go to finish the ritual, but the ritual is going to happen regardless. So please let me know how you like the dessert. My chef said it is the finest that they've ever made. And those are the kinds of moments that can be very intriguing with your players.
Yeah.
Because if you can cultivate that into a story, it really makes the story quite interesting. And oftentimes it then waxes into the... I'm not going to say the crazy, because on a personal level, you can oftentimes have villains who become enamored with heroes. Like they find a particular hero that meets a lot of their standards for what they would find as a mate, and yet they're on the other side of the coin, and now you have that odd romance.
Yeah, in a lot of
dance.
In a lot of tellings, that's Joker and the Batman. I think it's probably the most visible one of those.
Yeah, they definitely have a romance. But I think there's a little bit of others with the Joker. He's very hard to define. The second one is reactive. They're not in the plot. They're not part of the equation. The plot is next to them or running through their front yard. They're the mob boss who controls the whole town, and these heroes are literally just trampling through their flowers. And or they get involved. They are a pirate on the sea and hear about the treasure, and now it's a race, and they're involved in that regard.
I think the most important thing about the reactive villain is that if left to their own devices, they would just kind of keep doing what they're doing. Like you mentioned mob bosses earlier, you've got your criminal empire, and there's going to be fluctuations in that criminal empire, pushes and pulls in territory, and ebbs and flows in the drug trade or whatever it is they've got their fingers into. But ultimately, the mob boss is just going to be the mob boss.
Yeah.
They're just going to fill that void in the criminal empire of that territory.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And the hero's not interacting with them, they're just going to keep going. The mob boss.
And oftentimes the reactive villains who are not necessarily part of the main story are a secondary villain.
Yes.
They appear to be the primary. They appear to be the heavy, but in truth, they're not the plot.
Yeah, they make great complications to existing plots and stuff like that. Yeah. I can think of a thieves guild. Getting involved in a skirmish between two factions that dragged their fight into the Thieves Guild territory.
Yep.
Yep. And now suddenly the Thieves Guild is like, hey, now we're your enemy. And they're like, what? We don't even know you.
Right.
Why are we your enemy? Well, you fought on our territory and you bragged a bunch of bad publicity to us.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Indigenous people on an area that contains ancient relics that you're stopping someone from getting.
Yeah.
Now they're the problem, and negotiating that problem becomes even more challenging because they have their own beliefs about what belongs there. They don't even know what that thing is, but they know it belongs there and stays there, kind of a thing. And it's those kinds of moments that definitely set the stage for that level of villainy. It doesn't mean that they're not villains. It doesn't mean that they don't fit into those coins, but it definitely puts a different spin on them. And I do like the way you say that, they're just going to keep doing what they did and what they were going to do if left to their own devices.
Yeah, they've got their power structure.
Yep. Unless it aligns with what they want or part of their drive, they're probably just going to leave it alone. The last one, which is the one that often gets thrown into stories, is the rivalry. One where they are indirect knowledge of the heroes, and it is 100% part of their view to be recognized.
Right. I am doing my villainy because you exist, and I'm doing my villainy to you.
Right. Or around you, or to handle you.
Because of you, to handle you, to specifically to get your attention and get your involvement and stuff like that.
You were saying the Joker, to a degree, has the rivalry. It's the, you made me as much as I made you, let's have a messed up romance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Unbreakable, Mr. Glass, you're better than this. I will help you become better.
Right,
through challenges.
What you need right now is a villain to turn you into a hero. So here I am.
Right.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. Moriarty
depends on the telling, but yes.
I mean, I'm always better and will be always better, and I'm going to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you had a really good one, which is Khan versus Kirk.
Yeah, from original Star Trek.
Yep.
And I'm talking more less about the remake movie and
Correct.
more about the original Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
With Ricardo Montalban.
Yeah. You did this to me, and now I'm gonna burn everything to you.
Yep.
And it's all about that.
You marooned me on a planet, and I have been waiting for my revenge ever since.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And in the case of something like, which is funny, Pirates of the Caribbean, you left me on an island, marooned.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the same to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you that same regard.
And I'll give you the same courtesy of a pistol with one bullet.
That's correct. That's correct. I love when good rivalries are simplistic, and they can be defined and sometimes attached to backgrounds. It is hard to do it, I would say, healthy in a tabletop RPG, because you run the risk of having players leave the table,
mm-hmm.
Or die or change, and or not reciprocating.
Yeah.
And as a storyteller, it can get very disheartening if your players aren't into it.
Yeah.
If they're not meeting the level of the villain. What I find refreshing is if you can find the energy to remind yourself who the villain is and realize they're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, be the villain of, like, you're not even taking me seriously. What do I have to do? You know, like, if we were married, I'd buy you flowers and take you out and get you to dinner. So I guess I'll burn the forest.
It requires a grand overture to get their attention.
Exactly. Now I have your attention.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to take the remorse of the storyteller and put it to the side,
mm-hmm.
and remind yourself of the character and what they're doing.
Yep.
So, speaking of which, villains are people too.
Villains are people too. And I think this is, we talked a little bit about this on our last show about how, about the sympathetic villain and stuff like that. But this is less about what their motivations are and more about how your villains act in practice once they're actually in play. Because we like to kind of think of our villains as just these like mindless, murder machines. Sometimes, just doing evil acts because that's what they do. They're the villain.
They're the monster at that point.
They're the monster at this point.
Yeah.
But I submit to you that like your villains can and really should be smart,
mm-hmm.
acting in ways that are logical and calculated.
Yes.
They should be emotional, acting out of anger or grief or other passionate feeling, especially reacting towards thwarted plans of the heroes. When your heroes come in and thwart their plans, they don't just go, shucks, and try again next time. Like, reprisals are a thing.
Well, not only that, but just like the sheer agony of like, I have spent months pulling this together. Do you have any idea how many strings I had to pull just to get 7 grams of this material? I'm going to end you.
I'm going to make you pay for every... Yeah.
Yeah.
I said no sprinkles. For every sprinkle I find, I shall kill you.
Exactly. But, I mean, I think also under the sympathetic note, you have those moments where the villain does something tragic that they recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, out of necessity. Whether it was people who were, the villain, the heroes come back to their home base and find it destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had left something there that the villain wanted.
Yep.
And, they show up there, and on a table is a very nicely sealed note and a black rose, and wrapped in velvet, in black velvet, are the broken weapons of their guardsmen. who defended the place. And the note basically reads, I'm sorry for the acts. They were very brave. They fought well. We've buried them in the cemetery up back and given them proper stones.
Not even that. Just a note that says, you break some of mine, I break some of yours.
Sure.
But
it's I will go so far as to say that they were, they did well.
Sure.
He's not said that he killed them. He's just saying they deserved, they got a good death.
Mm-hmm.
I love a good villain who can do that.
Yeah.
Who can turn around and do that.
And that kind of brings us into our next one, being sympathetic, having understandable, albeit misguided rationale for their villainous ways. So you want them to make sense in a certain perspective.
Correct.
It's a skewed perspective because they are a villain, but the random acts of villainy, the random acts of violence and stuff like that don't typically play out well. You want the heroes to be able to look at them and, for the most part, be able to piece together why the villain is doing what they're doing.
Right.
And be able to track their motivations. If you don't, you run the risk of your players being just lost in your plot and not understanding what it is they're supposed to be doing to thwart the villain. And they may have similar agendas and see the heroes as a mean to an ends or even friendly, Yeah. You were talking about Maya and the three. Gods versus gods, of that whole that stereotypical line that you hear from a lot of villains of, we're not so different, you and I.
Yeah.
If you were to just see things from my perspective, you could join me.
Yeah.
You're powerful, I'm powerful, we essentially want the same thing.
Yeah.
Let's work together.
Yeah, if you understood that if you do this one thing my way, we could end all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sacrifice, and that's what I'm asking of you. But it's no different than the insane sacrifice you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Just hear me out. I've got some other information, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I'm still going to try and meet my goal because, I'm sorry, this isn't going to end well for you.
And you often hear a lot of justifications after that of if you only set aside your foolish morals, if you only set aside your foolish, adherence to the law or whatever, and crossed the same line I did, you'd see things from my perspective, and you could achieve your goals. But that's why you're failing, you pitiful heroes. That's why you haven't achieved your goal either, because you don't have the strength to do what's necessary that I do as a villain.
Or in the case of the whole light versus dark, you have to tap into those emotions to have power. They'll drive you. They'll tell you where to go.
It's the Jedi thing.
That's right.
There's so much strength in the dark side. If you just give yourself over to it, man, you'd whoop so much ass.
They use the words dark side. It's really just feelings.
Yeah.
It's just getting angry.
Yeah.
Or feeling love and,
Dark and light. Yeah, it's all semantics,
That's right.
So all of this stuff should drive their actions, their logical calculations, their emotional reactions, their moral justifications and stuff like that should all be the drivers behind their actions. If a smart villain learns that the heroes have loved ones, well, those are points of leverage. You use them.
Yeah, I mean, they may not do it in some grotesque way. They may do it in a very simple way of saying, I'm going to access them, or I am going to show that they are potentially a soft target that can't be protected from me. Mm-hmm. You love to see it when a hero, is on the phone with one of the villains. Red is a great example of this, where he's literally having a conversation, I believe, in the first movie, and he was just trace that line, we'll find him, and he just keeps talking to him, and he's just you're going to help me with this because you have something of mine and you know exactly how it feels. And he's just oh God. He's he's calling from your house. Please don't hurt my family. I'm not going to hurt them if you don't hurt her.
Yep.
Again, no harm will come to her. That's the whole thing.
Has no intention of hurting the family. He's not doing anything bad. But what he is doing is showing that he has access to them.
Yep. And
sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
And it's enough to just manipulate a person, whether your villain is willing to cross that line or not, of taking hostages or something like that. Is just showing that they can manipulate the other person. Say hello to your wife Sarah for me. Oh God, I've got to get home right now. Well, now you know exactly where the hero is.
Yeah.
You know where they are for probably the next hour.
At least.
And you can get away with a lot.
Yeah.
When you know that they're bound at home, thinking they're defending against an attack that's never coming.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to launch it. Why would you attack his wife? That's horrible.
Yeah.
But I am going to steal the crown jewels.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that's the thing. And then you have the emotional villain who can act out violently if those emotions are triggered.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's the moment that something slips, that somebody steps over the line. You know, they're holding their the someone that they love off the edge of a building and they let go, or something slips and you watch them turn into this raging monster.
I had 2 great examples of that. If you watch the Netflix Daredevil, I think it's in season 2. So the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk,
yes,
is has fallen in love with this woman named Vanessa, and in season 2, Kingpin is in jail for his crimes, all the organized crime and crap like that he did, and Vanessa has escaped overseas to Europe, and so she's evading arrest for being an accomplice essentially there, and Matt Murdock, because he's a lawyer, goes to see Fisk in jail,
right?
And at one point, basically brings up in the conversation as a point of leverage of like, it would be horrible if her visa were canceled because she would have to come back here to the United States, and what would happen to her then. And Fisk goes from, haha, you don't scare me, I'm a sophisticated businessman and I'm in full control of everything, into a raving lunatic at the drop of a hat.
Like, destroys the table.
Because Vanessa was threatened.
Right.
And that's the tipping point for him.
Yeah.
The other great one was season 1 of Critical Role. Spoilers for that.
A little old,
but it's going to be a major plot point in the upcoming TV series that is coming to Amazon Prime in February, I believe, is The Briarwoods. Delilah and Silas Briarwood were a necromancer and vampire power couple that loved each other very much, and in their own twisted way. I mean, they were horrible, they were vile monsters, but they were madly in love with each other. And when they crossed blades with the heroes in that story, Silas was killed by the druid using a sunbeam, and just evaporated into dust right in front of his wife Delilah. And she cries out. She's like, "No, Silas! I broke the world for you!" And it was one of the greatest lines I have heard in Critical Role ever. And the way that Matt Mercer delivered it had so much pain in his voice when he shouted it. And those are the moments that sit with you,
Yep.
Those moments when you take a villain and by your heroic actions break them, and they just snap, and just watching where they go from there.
Yep. Yep. So one of the things that I think we run into, because we were you had brought this up, and it was actually going to be a discussion point when you had put it in here, but you explained it really well when we were talking in the pre-show, was smart villains can feel cheaty.
Oh, they absolutely can.
Because you are the storyteller. You know everything about your players.
Sure,
you know everything as they're going. So oftentimes when you get into a fight and the first thing that they do is shift tactics and immediately start attacking the players a certain way, the players are all like, "Oh, it's just you. It's not the actual villain."
Oh, yeah, you're just cheesing this because you know the only thing that I'm weak to is this. Well, no, the villain also knows the only thing you're weak to is that. That's why he's using it.
But sometimes it's hard to telegraph
that
it's the villain.
And that's the thing. And I think, like, I think the players sometimes get especially like in D&D, I find. Your players tend to get very into a rhythm. Players fall into their particular roles.
Yep.
You always know that the pyromancer sorcerer is going to cast fireball at the first opportunity. You always know the healer is going to heal. The bard is going to toss out inspiration like it's cookies, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then a smart villain will identify that and will know that the first time they see a healing spell go off, that dude needs to die because they are the one, like, it's a battle of attrition.
Yeah.
And if you cut off their healing, you're cutting off their resupply. At that point, they cannot continue to do what they do as long as you can continue to do.
Right.
Yeah.
But
players can really feel like they're being targeted by that. I mean, you played the cleric in our group.
I did.
Would you have felt good about it if every single enemy in like a 6 or 8 enemy encounter glomped on you and just gunned you down in the first turn?
I would feel pretty bad.
It would feel
but it
pretty
makes
bad.
sense to me.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so there's a real fine line you've got to kind of walk with that.
Right.
And I think one of the big things is to keep an open dialogue with your group. I mentioned last episode that I told Sean specifically that the investigators from the Sijic Order that are there to kind of look into his BS story about destroying the crown were going to be a thorn in his side. I told them those were specifically there to be a plot for his character, and that I wasn't just picking on him.
Right.
Because I wanted that out in the open.
Yeah.
I didn't want those feelings of resentment to fester when these guys keep showing up for him, and then have him feel bad about it, and then have to diffuse that situation later.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm doing any disservice to the story. I think, we live in a big spoiler culture where, we don't want to give away any hints of, what's going to happen or what's going on behind the screen. But I think it's all very relics of, the old DM versus player mentality.
Right.
I prefer a much more collaborative storytelling style.
I agree, and that's why, most of my heroic stuff, I do I show a little bit what's going on behind the screen.
Yeah,
I do my
exactly.
meanwhiles, where I'm not necessarily telegraphing all of my villain stuff, but I might telegraph things that that they have learned.
Right.
So that things that the players are already aware of, it's more of a reminder. They know he's going after this, and he just got his hands on X, but one of his henchmen might say, also, while we were there, we were able to discover X about this person.
I see. That would be very useful.
And
in
a couple
the future.
coins, a coin purse gets tossed to his henchman, A, for what he's learned. And so now that's been telegraphed. It's out in the open. The players may forget about it.
So then when that player gets targeted, because that piece of information is in the villain's pocket, then they're like, oh, yeah, you did mention he knew about that. At least the player is saying that, because obviously the character has no idea.
Correct.
But the player is going, oh, yep, this is a perfectly justified action, and you told me it was going to happen.
Yep. And it's a lot of seeds. There's a lot of little things, and it takes time and a lot of notes and a lot of careful reminding of yourself as a storyteller to be able to say, to remember this. There are things that I've planted in my D&D game that I have with you that are all throughout the story, little things that you guys know in the backs of your heads because they are events that have occurred that are going to come back around and are going to be not necessarily surprising, but very, very striking. But it takes quite a bit of foresight to not necessarily plant those seeds, but to recognize that they are there. Your players will leave a lot on the floor for you to pick up all the time. And sometimes it's just a matter of reviewing things with them, not yourself, because you're on with your plot. You're thinking about your villain. You're doing all these things.
Sure.
You're not necessarily picking up all the pieces, but one of your players may have simply lost something or broken something in front of other people, said something at the wrong time. There's nothing to say that your villain didn't pick up on that.
Sure.
And that later on, 13 episodes later, they act on that knowledge. I loved a good game where basically almost every major fight that they were playing in, the players would do the same thing. They'd peek into a room, they'd see what was going on in there, and then their mage would open up with a AoE spell that was carved so that they could rush in and take out the lighter things and focus on the heavier things. Whether it was lightning, whether it was fire, whatever. But it was a giant AoE spell. The DM in that story had set up early these methods that when they died, they would explode. And it was kind of a neat little trick because the first time it happened, it spooked the heck out of the one of the players that they took some extra damage from it. But then he had basically a room of sleeping methods, and they had to sneak through it and not have, because they could fight their way through, but they were not going to survive it. You know, then he kind of just let that slide, and he got near the end, and he knew that they were coming up to one of the final fights, and he was like, I need to make sure that they recognize the story. I need to monologue. It has to happen.
Sure.
So the big bad evil guy starts his monologue. They're like, okay, well, we could get him by surprise if we keep the conversation up. Somebody can get in position and we can AoE the area. And literally they get to that point, and there are 2 cages suspended in the middle of the room on either side of the villain with their friends in it. But strapped to the cages are the Mephits poking in at the people. And they're like, we can't AoE the room. We'll literally kill our friends.
Yep.
And
there's shrapnel bombs attached to them, essentially.
Yeah, it was a simple thing, and they recognized all of it, and they were like, oh my gosh, we telegraphed all of this. Like, our game is up. We have to find a new way to handle this.
Yeah.
And so they had to hear out his monologue the whole time. They're trying to figure out how they're going to redo this situation.
Yeah.
And he basically tells them, like, I have you where I want you. The question is, are you ready? And the players weren't. They literally said, like, can we do like a short break and like come back next session? We need to figure this out. And he's like, yup. And he realized at that point he had made a good story and made a good tactical scene.
Yeah.
And they understood it all. And I was like, that is great breadcrumbing.
Yeah.
And he had no plan to do that originally. But he just kept on trying to figure out, like, how am I going to handle these AoEs? Like, how am I going to get around this? And the best thing he could figure out was, I need to put civilians in there.
Yeah.
Because he would do it.
Yep.
Just to get his point across.
That's what my big bad evil guy did.
He did.
Put like 14 people in front of him, and they were all basically mind slaves to him too. So they would all take a bullet for him, or an arrow, or whatever.
Yep. It was a really well done scene. Well done scene.
So speaking of the monologue,
yes, the monologue.
Man, oh god, the villains love everybody loves the monologue. I think everybody loves the monologue.
I would say so.
I want to say that's a pretty universal thing. I mean, because
all good storytellers love a monologue. All good players who do storytelling love a good monologue.
Yes, and because it's a great opportunity for plot exposition. It's a great opportunity for your villain to show his hand a little bit in the story, to brag about his motivations and the awful things that he's done and stuff like that, and kind of build things up. And like, there's. Man, there is such a trend of trigger-happy players that want to take the monologue as an opportunity to try to sneak attack the villain, and I don't get it.
I don't agree with it.
It's frustrating, because, like, why would you stop such a great story moment?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just let him talk. You can fight after. I'm sure you can fight after.
Yeah.
You know? But just let him talk.
Yeah, I don't even mind
to you as players.
I don't even mind when they try an ambush and it gets thwarted, and they continue monologuing.
Right.
It isn't like there's still flies.
But
like, the situation is not ended for them, you know.
We brought up Syndrome last episode, and I think that's where a lot of people got it. Everybody who saw The Incredibles, and they're like, "You sly devil, you caught me monologuing." They're like, "Oh, I want to catch him monologuing." No, stop, guys, just let him talk, man.
Yep.
Let him talk. He's about to reveal all of his plans to you.
Yep. I mean, that's the other thing that always gets me is
I've been working on his voice in the shower and on my commute to work this entire time. I got it perfect.
Well, one of the favorite things is Phineas and Ferb. The other half of the story is Doofenshmirtz versus Perry.
Yeah.
And Doofenshmirtz has a friendly relationship with his nemesis. Like, he knows how the game's going to be played.
Sure.
You're gonna break in my door. I'm gonna give you my whole monologue and give you my backstory and reasoning for why I'm doing it. We're gonna have an epic fight. My thing's gonna go off. You're gonna blow it up. This is the standard thing. This is how it's gonna go every time. You know. So when the door opens up, you know, he's like, "Oh, you use the doorbell. Thank you for not causing severe damage to my... That will really help the HOA and insurance this week. Why don't you have a cup of tea? We'll just take a 5-minute break here. I've actually got a whole musical number for my backstory on this one. Just sit down and relax for a little bit." And he traps him in the chair, naturally, you know?
That's a line from The Crow. Like, are you going to jump out the window like you always do? He's like, "I thought I'd use the door."
You know? And it's things like that set apart moments and change the tone.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's nothing to say that isn't a great way to handle it.
Sure. And look, not all monologues have to be sit down and have a cup of tea with me. Sometimes they're tense standoffs. Absolutely. Yeah. I have hostages, so you will listen to every damn word I have to say.
Right.
You know, but I think the important thing, one of the things I want to get at here, because it's one of the things I always see, is you get that one player who shouts out, "I loose an arrow at him," or I shoot him in the head.
Yeah, I had my weapon ready.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be said that like these are not surprise rounds / free shots.
Yeah.
Okay. Surprise is predicated on the idea that the target is not expecting you or cannot see it coming. Standing there staring at the party while monologuing to the people who are there to thwart you are neither of these situations. Your villain expects a confrontation. That's why they're monologuing.
Correct. Correct. My favorite is always the bad dubbing, or sublines. It's the enough talk, let's fight. I like that kind of return. Where the very end of the fight is always, is the hero saying like, "You've talked enough, villain. Let's fight."
Yeah.
Call them out. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. Like your words are as empty as your soul, monster. You know, great little things like this. You guys could be delivering cheesy ass dialogue like this during these monologues, but you instead choose to just shoot.
Yeah.
So I say to you, all storytellers, if you do have a trigger-happy person trying to interrupt your monologue, roll for initiative as normal. This is not a surprise round.
Yep.
You the villain absolutely expects this to happen.
Yeah.
And is going to be just as ready to react to the players, and may in fact, like, even if the person already has their bow out and an arrow knocked, the very act of them drawing it back and pulling it up to aim is enough time for a fast enough villain to react and do something.
Well, even if they've got it drawn already and on target, there's nothing to say that the villain is not going to just be able to shield and block at the side. Like, please, are we children?
Exactly.
You know?
So, and that's the other thing too. Don't be afraid to shield your villain in some way.
Right.
I did this with Titus Cruento, the necromancer. I had him under an invulnerability shield. That was just some magical contrivance I cooked up. Like, it's not in the D&D book at all.
Right.
It was just like, yeah, he's got an invulnerability shield for the first 3 turns.
Yep.
Just so you guys couldn't do that. And he threw some rumties at you, and he couldn't get out of the shield. He wasn't doing anything.
Right.
But he got to monologue to you for the first 3 rounds of combat while you guys fought undead minotaurs.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the shield dropped, and he joined the battle, and you could kill him after that. That's fine.
Yep.
But I just did not want that combat to be over in the first 3 turns, so I made a contrivance for it.
I also love the whole concept of monologuing through combat. Like, get the story out during the combat. Players love using talk as a free action. There's nothing to say the villain has to be silent and grunty the entire time.
Yeah.
Like, I love a good conversation during combat.
Oh, absolutely. Keep that... If they interrupt your monologue, don't stop.
Keep it going.
Don't stop. First round of combat, think of a chunk of that monologue you could conceivably say from behind the bulletproof glass that you've ducked behind to take cover on your first round of combat. Fire your gun off a few times and go, "It didn't have to be like this, heroes.
Yeah.
It could have been great if you'd have just joined me," you know?
Yep.
Keep going.
Then the scene from Grosse Pointe Blank when they're in the living room shooting at each other, having a negotiation about him joining the Union.
Oh, yeah.
And he's just like, "Do you guys have dental?"
Him and Dan Aykroyd, right?
Yeah. No dental. No dice. Do. You know, and it was comical, but at the same time, it is telling. Having the barbarian character, shield and blade up, pressed up against the villain who's glaring back at him, and is just like, "You'd make an amazing right hand. I could put you," and he tosses him to the side, with a say like, "Right here at my side." Replace all of that broken bits of things that you call weapons with truth and justice, and we could take everything. It's Darth Vader talking to Luke through the entire fight. Regardless of how it's going, he isn't finishing. He's going to finish what he has to tell him.
Yep.
And answer the questions.
I did a little bit of that with the kind of the end boss of the Poppy King plot.
Yes,
who actually turned out not to be the Poppy King, but
Correct.
turned out to be a Mogrub, the orc barbarian dude.
Yeah.
But he always had this mantra that he would say. There's only 2 types of people in the world: the strong and the weak, the hunter and the hunted. If you're not the lion, you're the gazelle.
Yeah.
And your wife actually had this great moment where he was switching targets, basically, and she put like 3 arrows into his chest or something like that, and just went, "Yoo-hoo, I'm the hunter."
Yeah.
It was just this great moment of, like, come get me.
Yeah.
You know?
Come bring it. Yeah.
Oh, and he did.
Oh, he did. He did. And that's another thing is that by doing this, you're opening up role play. You're bringing the role play back to a tabletop game.
Exactly, because role play doesn't stop when combat starts.
No.
You know?
I mean, how many times have you been playing a digital game where you're fighting someone, you're like, yeah, bring it, come on, and you're having a conversation, but there's nothing happening on the other side.
Exactly.
It's just combat. Now you have that other side. Now it's a press against you. That is the beauty of roleplay. That's what roleplay is.
Dialogue during combat, I'm thinking, well, haven't any of you fools heard of a warning shot?
That was beautiful. He's an idiot.
He's an idiot. Don't mind him.
Shut up or I'm going to leave you bleeding right here.
Oh, great moments in asshole bard history.
Oh, it was fantastic. But he so played his character, and I loved it.
All right, so I guess kind of the crux of our matter then.
Yes.
The main villainous movement. What
Yes.
do you do with a villain? How do you progress their villainous plans?
So it's a balance between punishing the players for not being decisive, and villains laying about waiting for the heroes to show up.
Exactly.
Like, you've got to find that even ground. And that's where we talk about, in our previous stories, we've talked about event triggers, doom clocks, the fronts. That whole bar of things. So it's turn-based movement, and that's a good way of thinking about it, where your villain has plot points. But so do your players. They have chunks that they're moving through. Clear a dungeon. Get to the end of an area, retrieve an item, or in some cases not lose an item, depending on how the events go. In those, the villain also gets a movement. Just because his henchmen are doing it doesn't mean that there isn't a reply back to him, and you don't have to follow time and physics.
Exactly.
All of that can be set to the side.
Exactly.
And that's why why in my stories, I give the players a view into that. I give them an example of someone writing a note or leaving a message or talking to the villain. So that, even if it's through, like, the villain's this shadowy figure, hidden in the darkness, and the only person in the light is the one person that they've seen, that henchman that they've seen who's delivering this message to them. So they don't even necessarily know who the villain is, but they know he's getting the information. That they're getting that. That's the key to the next turn. That's the villain showing their turn.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. I think it's a fun way of doing it, but at least if you write that down, if you know their goal step to step, and you're like, okay, they completed this. Okay, the players did this. All right, then they've got to do this next.
Right, the player completed a plot point,
Yeah.
so the villains get their plot point because the players did not thwart the villain with their own plot point.
Correct.
So there's moves forward a step. I don't care how much time has passed.
Right.
The villain now accomplishes a goal.
Yep. And sometimes your players are moving very quickly, or they're doing things that are in a certain order that thwart and delay things. They're just doing really well. There's nothing to say that your villain isn't staggering.
Sure.
There's still movement, but it's staggered. It's maybe slower. Maybe they're recollecting things. Maybe they're taking a long rest.
Maybe your villain needs time to replan. Maybe they've been thwarted enough that their original plan is either not possible, or they're seeing that it's too easily thwarted by the PCs and things like that. You may have a shift in their plans. They're not slavishly just moving towards it. That's where you may have a shift from, okay, I can't accomplish my plans while these heroes keep thwarting it. Maybe my new plan is thwart the heroes. Because clearly they're just going to continue to be an obstacle. Maybe I need to go after them, and that's my next plot point.
Yeah. Knox made a point here. He said, "Is it fair to pull the Osmandius card and have things happen that are too late for the party to prevent?" And I think in tabletop gaming, it's group storytelling, and what you're basically doing is removing the other players from the game at that point. You're removing their agency.
Yes and no. I agree with you for the most part, but I think there's a way of doing it where you can do it, because the villains still need to be able to accomplish villainous things. right?
I agree.
And so I think being able to do things that are... I don't think they should accomplish their goal, like the goal with a capital G.
Correct.
Without player...
And that's really what I was addressing, that the Osmandius card specifically means I'm completing my goal.
Yes.
And
yes,
I do not... I think that removes player agency. Can they do something outside of the player's control? Yes. And this comes back to the story that we had where you're not going to wipe out a whole town.
Right.
You know, but you may steal something.
Mm-hmm.
And that was outside of the player's control.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
or your villain may get their hands on an NPC that's meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's outside of the player's control because it wasn't in their view. You know, maybe it wasn't in their focus. And I think that's really where your villain's ace cards can come in, where their focus is somewhere else. You made a perfect example. The players get the choice of like, hey, you guys can go do this or this. You know the consequences is it leaves your flank open.
Mm-hmm.
Like the villain has that, you know where the villain's going. You know, you can go stop that, but they're going to get their hands on this.
Yeah.
So it's joint storytelling. You're painting the if-then statements for the players and letting them then choose the fate and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost blatantly obvious what's going to happen. It's just how does it happen? What is the outcome?
Sure.
So,
I think the other thing too is write down your villain's goals.
Always
write down your villain's goals. I think we mentioned it last episode of kind of have a mission statement for your
what's
for your
their
villain.
drive?
Because if there's ever a moment where you're thinking, oh God, what is my villain going to do? Mm-hmm. You have a guiding star to like if they're ever in a quandary of like, okay, they're just kind of in open water, they could kind of do anything here. They're gonna move towards their goal,
right?
And that's it. So, always gives you at least some current to push their ship in that direction. And I do want to say, be careful of spite. Take the time to consider that, like, unless thwarting the party is the villain's goal.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, like a reactive villain, who directly wants to direct their ire towards a specific person or group. Whether the villain views the party or the goal as the most important, we sometimes make the villains too focused on the party.
I agree.
They can get a little distracted where they're like, I'm going to kill them with this vicious trap or this vicious trap, and it's like, why are they spending so much time trying to kill us? Like, don't they have things they're trying to accomplish? Like, I understand that we're stopping them, but
it doesn't make for interesting story.
It doesn't make for interesting story. It just makes for death traps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes you feel targeted.
In a short-term story. In a short-term story where you basically have someone who is trying to upper hand the PCs for some reason, usually their goal is to do it for recognition. And in that case, they're gonna try and do it more and more and more observably, so that it causes failure. Because outright killing the players doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And spite can definitely be used as something as an instantaneous moment that even they regret because it's disrespectful. Like, what I just did was not the way to handle that, and I'm very sorry. Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to blow up your parents' house. Like, it was more of a reaction. Yeah. But that's a thing. You can do that. Like, and it shows that the players pushed a button a little too far.
Yeah.
They pushed something and that even they need to be careful about.
And it can kind of tend to humanize them too. Like, I apologize. That crossed a line even for me. You understand.
The one where like the henchman comes in, and explains that he burned down the village.
I did some horrible thing on your behalf, boss. Is like, you did what now?
Yeah.
And just kills him as an example to everybody else. That was unacceptable. I apologize for my henchman. He's been dealt with.
Yeah.
I have strung him up.
Yeah.
And read his entrails for a sign from the gods.
Yeah. And they said I did the right thing.
So we're square now.
Yeah. I'm very sorry about that. But that's what you've got to watch those lines and watch that you're never moving beyond your villain's vision and control. And sometimes it's as simple as recognizing that they are not a monster.
Mm-hmm.
that they have thoughts, they have feelings, they have people around them that are going to try and keep them in focus.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. All right, so we have one question actually, from the Discord here.
okay.
So Og and Me asks, from the time you decide upon your villain or introduce your villain, do you plan out a series of actions the villain will take? Do you make changes or alterations based on the party's actions or responses to the villain's activities? Without seeing the villain, how do you signal to the party that they... This is a long question.
It's a lot of
All right,
questions.
let's break this down a little bit.
We're starting at the beginning.
All right, so from the time you decide your villain or introduce your villain, do you plan out a series of actions the villain will take?
Typically, no. I plan a direction that they're taking and maybe their first and second action. That's it.
Yeah. I would say there are stepping stones of like they'll do this to accomplish this with the end goal of this.
Yeah, oftentimes without the players even as a thought.
Yeah. Exactly. Without the players interacting with it,
Yeah.
this is this step A, B, C to the end goal of D is what they will do.
Yep. And then it definitely the next question: do you make alterations? 100%.
Absolutely, you have to.
Every time a player does or a character does something that alters the story for that villain, 100%, I make changes.
I think of it a little bit like flowing water.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you block off one area, the water will try to flow around that to find the lowest point again.
Right.
You know. So that it's always flowing downhill. And so your villain is the river. Your heroes are going to try to put dams up in front of the river.
Yep.
Your goal is to try to find a way around those dams to end up where the river's going to go anyways.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and sometimes they can create a literal lake for a while.
Sometimes the only way through is busting down the dam.
And that's where you really have to recognize that at what point does the villain believe that the heroes, that the characters are a problem that needs to be handled? Or are they just another bump in the road?
Nuisance to send some henchmen after.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Without seeing the villain, how do you signal to the party that that what they encounter or experience can be attributed to the villain if they don't see the villain do it personally?
Well, that was my entire plot. This last section.
Yeah.
It was all people acting on his behalf.
Yep.
And being very clear about who they were acting on the behalf of. Like, oh, you can't mess with us. We're servants of the Poppy King.
Correct.
You're on the Poppy King's turf.
That's right.
And that makes all of your goods and valuables forfeit.
Yep.
Give them to us.
Yeah. Having very clearly defined and proud henchmen is a huge thing. You see it in all the shows. It's already painted out. I mean, one of my favorite ones was the Monarch's Men. Like, they constantly, they looked like little butterflies, or, you know, they constantly talked about the monarch and how powerful he was.
Dun. Sorry.
No, totally. I'm with you 100% on the. So, they're a grand example of the epitome of what henchmen and villains' men should be like, in the sense that they should be proud and obvious to the heroes.
Yeah.
Everyone else, they're just there. But the heroes hear it, they know it, they're very comfortable with it. I mean, the law even talks about it. It's like, oh, you mean those yellow guys over there? Oh, those are the Monarchs guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of useless, but they're definitely loyal.
And look, even outside of the sort of like four color comic book sense that the Monarch is in, like, okay, so look at mobsters, you know, stuff like that. Like, they're proud of their family affiliation, and if absolutely nothing else, dropping their mob boss's name gives them clout.
Yeah,
like, you're not just messing with me, you know, Four-Fingered Tony. You're messing with Don Corleone.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, crap, you're one of Don Corleone's guys. Like,
exactly.
Now I know that if I cross you, I cross your boss, and your boss is a horrible person.
Right.
And I don't want that heat.
Yeah.
You know, they're banking on you making that connection. So they're going to drop his name.
Mm-hmm.
And Don Corleone says hello. Brrr.
Yeah. And like the Russian mob is a very large entity, but all of the players in it are very proud to be part of it, and it's very clear who they are when they roll up in their vehicles, the way they look, the way their cars look, in comparison to everything around them.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
When the black horses with black leather and silver bridles and, black masked figures with red paint across the top edge of their eyes come in, okay, that's the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everybody in town knows who those people are.
Right.
So.
All right, so have you ever intertwined two main villain activities together in your story, which caused the characters to make critical decisions at different branch points in the storyline, or cause confusion as to who the main villain actually is?
Yes. It turned out poorly. I'll flat out say that it turned out poorly. I did that in 7th Sea, and it turned out poorly. I had to figure it out because the players did not understand what was going on as clearly as I understood it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing you got to be careful about is confusing the issue, because the players are probably already going to be confused.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the reasons why, like, when you're making puzzles for your group, like dungeon puzzles and stuff like that, like, you should really pull them out of like a first grade kindergarten book.
Yeah.
Because dead honest, your players will overthink everything.
Yeah.
Or they'll underthink everything. I was recently hearing a story on another podcast I was listening to about someone who literally the solution to the puzzle was as easy as like basic math, 1 + 1 = 2 sort of stuff, and the people trying to solve it went on for like 45 minutes, and like advanced calculus and like base 8 math came into their solutions, and like eventually they were like, okay, look. I, as a storyteller, I'm going to say, stop it.
You've gone too far. Well, and I've always had to do that. Like my D&D plot, I brought back to basics. I streamlined the whole plot because I did have multiple players in it at different times that were effectively red herrings or confusion points.
Yeah.
They did too good of a job.
Yeah.
So,
and your players start going, I don't know what the hell's going on.
And you lose interest. It's sad, but it's the truth of it. And so what I always say is, unless your players are devoted and you are week in, week out, on top of everything with heavy notes, and they almost know more about what's going on in your world than you do, do not throw them multiple villain crossover moments.
Yeah. The wheels within wheels within wheels within wheels does not play out as well on the table as you think it does in your head.
The only thing I will say to that is, if you have a vast world that your players are playing a very string-designed plot, meaning there is a thread that they are clearly following, without a question, and that thread happens to go through a town that has a mob boss in it. Okay, there's your second villain. It's clear that he is not part of the plot, but he may get involved when he finds out about it.
Because you're on his turf, essentially, and he takes that personally.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's where you see that happen in a lot of TV shows. Avatar did that exceptionally well. Where you had villains basically taking opportunities. Or where you have historical things. Where you have maybe a player's rivalry step in, and try and handle a situation, and it basically becomes an extra obstacle to a relatively simple act that's about to happen. Like, we're going to break into we're going to go into this party. We're literally going to, some of you guys are going to make a distraction, in the main part of the party, and we're going to go steal this object. Got it? And then we're just out. We're immediately going to head for the ship.
Sure.
Great. Walk into the front door of the party. Everything seems to be going great. The people who are about to make the distraction turn, and in walks their rival, sees them eye to eye, and now the dance is on. And you're like, are we leaving? Not yet. Why? I gotta handle something. No, you don't. No, you don't. We have to go. That's the kind of stuff that you want. You don't want them wondering if that person's involved.
The other one that I love is the side distraction that shows up is like in the Three Musketeers. D'Artagnan! That guy, like, he's not even tied into the main plot. He's literally just some jerk that shows up to complicate things,
Yep.
All right, so we're wrapping up here.
I think this is it.
All right.
This is good.
So our next week's topic is going to be our System Spotlight. It'll be the second Wednesday of the month. We're talking about the Alien RPG.
Yes, the actual Alien RPG.
So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave. You can find us on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on our Discord. You can find that link on our Twitter, as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd also like to thank our Patreon members, especially our name members, Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion Veteran, and Hulavu. We really appreciate everything you do every month to help us and keep this going. Please join us up on that Patreon. We would love to have additional support so we can do more for the show. Our intro music, our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/Arcane Anthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at freemusicarchive.org.
A big shout out as always to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us all these years. All of our friends who've sat with us at our tables over the years to give these great stories to share with you, and you, every single one of our listeners. We love you so much.
Love you guys.
Good night.
Good night.